Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another Sales Hacker webinar. And today we have a very, very special guest. We have Jason Jordan. Jason, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. All right, so today we're going to be talking about modern sales coaching in 2018. We're going to say goodbye to fluff and hello to processes. And just a quick couple of housekeeping items for you guys. This webinar is being recorded, so don't feel that you're going to miss anything. You're going to get a follow-up email when it's done containing the recorded webinar video, and you're also going to get the deck as well as part of that. And if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to just pop them into the question box and we'll get to them throughout the webinar. And then at the end, we're going to have Q&A available as well. But we are going to be taking questions throughout the presentation. You can ask Jordan, Jason, anything that you want pertaining to the presentation. So let's get into the introductions. All right, so you guys know me by now, and if you don't, my name is Gaetano. I run digital marketing at Sales Hacker. Before Sales Hacker, I was running content and SEO at Pipedrive and other software companies. And Jason, welcome to the webinar, and why don't you tell the audience a little bit about what you've done in the past and what you're up to right now at Vantage Point.
Sure. So I'm Jason Jordan. I'm a partner at a company called Vantage Point. I'll tell you a little bit more about us as we move through the session, but basically we're a sales training firm that's focused on sales management, sales leadership. And so we do a lot of research into sales management issues, pipeline management, forecasting, coaching, CRM, using data to manage and coach better. And we'll touch on at least a couple of those topics today.
Awesome. Yeah, it's going to be great. I'm looking forward to it. Before we dive in, are there any particular problems that seem to be trending in the world of sales management right now from your perspective?
Well, it's funny. I always say that in sales, we don't have any new problems. We just have unsolved problems. And so, we're talking about a couple of those struggles today. But, in the last 20 years, CRM has been an issue, continues to be an issue. I mean, it's a great opportunity, but,
Right.
the technology over the last 20 years has gotten so much better. We don't see people using it much better. And then people continue to struggle with coaching. We'll talk about that today. I think it's salespeople are kind of interesting in that they're very easily distracted. So social media and a lot of other kind of current topics are really getting a lot of attention. But I think that my perception is that people are still struggling with kind of the basics. And,
Yeah.
and so, we really focus on the blocking and tackling of sales and sales management in our perspective. So, there's no shortage of things to talk about in sales.
Definitely. And I'm looking forward to getting back to basics as well. We're seeing that, in Sales Hacker in the world of B2B tech, and what we're seeing a lot too, as tech is evolving, things are getting more complex and more complicated. So getting back to the basics, the blocking and tackling, as you mentioned, is something that not only in sales is something that's coming to the surface, but also in the marketing side as well. So without further ado, I'm looking forward to this, Jason. So why don't you dive right in and take us through it?
Yeah, thank you. So let me just set this up and then I'll move forward. So the topic is kind of loosely coaching and in the era of CRM. That's the way I would describe this. And so for the presentation, I'm going to talk about these two key levers of sales performance, coaching and then CRM. And in an ideal world, these two things are working together, obviously. But what we really found to be the case, and I think most people would agree, is that both of these things are broken. Coaching is something that everyone wants and no one seems to get. CRM is something that everyone has and no one seems to really get. And so what I want to do today is kind of take each of these in turn. First talk about coaching and some of the issues we see there, then talk about CRM and some of the issues we see there, and then at the end try to marry these two issues. And throughout this we'll use a case study of a client of ours where we think they kind of got this right.
Awesome.
Let me start. Yes. So before we get into that, let me just a little bit for a couple slides talk about Vantage Point, because I think it's informative to kind of understand our perspective on this. So as I mentioned before, we focus on sales management, and we're the only training company that really enters the conversation of the layer of sales management. And we think sales management is where it's at. If you've ever failed to implement a sales process, failed to get CRM adoption, failed to have a methodology take place, we don't blame the trainers or the technologists. We blame leadership. And so we think if sales management knows what to do, everything else is better inside the organization. And I'll share a little bit of research with you today, but not a great deal, but we do believe in research. Everything we write, train, is based on our research into best practices, and there, some eye candy there for you. Some brands where we regularly publish our stuff have to add sales hacker to that. The thing I mentioned before, we focus on execution. We're not a classic leadership training company. I mean, we think that sales management needs to focus on managing the pipeline and doing forecasts and coaching and using CRM. So we really focus on the Monday to Friday things that sales managers do. And the final thing that I'll say about us, because I think this is a kind of insightful for a lot of people, we've got client results here on the right. It's a 30% revenue improvement in one division of this big global company, and 20% more reps at quota. And anyone's going to tell you they've had great results in the sales force. The thing that's interesting here is we've never trained a salesperson to achieve these results. All of this was driven by better sales management. So that's why we're so convicted that sales management, today we'll talk about coaching, which is, I think, the most important role of sales management. But there's this source of ROI that people don't fully appreciate. If you could train 1/10 of your sales force and get as much benefit as training your salespeople, then why wouldn't you? And that's kind of a value proposition to the market.
Yeah, I think the default is like, how do we focus on the tactics that the reps are doing? That's like kind of the default thing. I see this all the time in just the conversations that I have with folks at our conferences and throughout our content strategy and contributors that want to submit to the blog and so many other things. It's like the default thing is like, oh, how can we cold call better and all this stuff? But meanwhile, like you said, how do you fraction that down to, sharpening up 1/10 of your sales force and getting maybe double or triple the result?
I know, and it makes sense. I mean, if you want your salespeople to do better, it makes sense to train your salespeople. The issue is at a certain point, just reach diminishing marginal returns. And the way we look at it is you want your sales managers to change their behaviors, the salespeople change their behaviors, so that your customers change their behavior. And that's the way that that's the way that goes. And I think enablement people are starting to catch on. In the 10 years ago when we started focusing on sales management, we spent a lot of our time, our sales cycles, trying to convince people that sales managers were worth the effort. Now I think people come to us acknowledging that sales management's a problem. They just don't know what to do with it. And we'll talk about some of that, for the next few minutes here.
Awesome.
All right, let's talk about coaching. So coaching is something that I find a little bit entertaining and maybe a little bit depressing at the same time. Coaching is not a new topic. And it's hard to believe we're still struggling with this, but we are. The coaching has probably been around since there's been discipline in the sales force. And I always go back to John Henry Patterson, who was basically the head of the National Cash Register Company, which is now NCR. And in the 1800s, he basically established all of the sales management tools that we're using today, right? Territories, incentive compensation, sales training, and along with that surely came coaching. I mean, they had some expectation that their management team was going to be doing this, and so it's been around a century at least. And it's the only thing in the sales force I think that everyone agrees with. If you take CRM, people kind of shake their head, roll their eyes. Everyone wants coaching. Like the leadership wants it to happen. This is actually 3 surveys the internal training departments deployed inside their organization to sales managers. So managers want it. They see that it's important. This is the training that they said they wanted, and salespeople like to receive it. There's no one arguing against training. It's something that everyone buys into, and literally they buy into it. Here's a case study I'm going to kind of weave into the storyline today. This is I mean, you would know this company. I shouldn't share the name, but big global company. And we worked with one of their divisions. They had 124 sales managers. We looked at their training history in their LMS, learning management system, and they had taken 401 courses that either had in the title or coaching was one of the key objectives. And they estimated 5,000 hours taking people out of the field, putting them in training. I mean, this company had invested a lot in coaching. I mean, they were believers in coaching, and they put their money where their mouth is. But here's the part that makes me both laugh and cry. So they deployed a survey back to the sales managers, and they said, how much time are you spending training your sales reps? And these are the results that came back from the management team. So basically 93% of the sales managers said that they were spending at least 3 hours per month training each of their sales reps. So you look at this and you think, wow, this money well spent, all that training and development we did for coaching. And it felt pretty good until they also surveyed the salespeople and asked them how much how much coaching they were receiving from those very same managers. And you know where this is going. I mean, you can see the setup. And so it's more than half of the sales reps said that they weren't really receiving any coaching. And it's exactly the same. I mean, these are the reps that reported to those managers. This isn't, this is literally what it looks like.
Oh man.
And so we see this big disparity between, what people want, what they invest in, what they expect, and what sales managers even think they're doing, and what's really happening in the field. Because salespeople are they're the consumers of coaching, right? I mean, if the sales rep doesn't think they're getting coached, let's just go ahead and say they're not getting coached. And
Right.
so it's kind of a funny story. We've seen similar research done inside other companies, other clients of ours, and there's always this gap. And I talk a little bit about why we think that is. But I mean, does this shock you? Does this surprise you?
No, not at all.
See, you can laugh and cry simultaneously.
Yeah, yeah.
Crying on the inside, clown.
Yeah.
So let me just talk about a few issues that we see with coaching.
Hey Jason, how long ago was that survey? Just curious.
This survey would have been. So this is one of our earlier clients, kind of pointed us in this direction. It's probably 2010.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, so just to punctuate this even more, the reason that this company engaged us is they were suffering low win rates. So they're dominant in this industry. For them to win 25% of their forecasted deals was historically poor performance. And this is a quote from the learning and development leader, which I love. She said it was very frustrating that we knew what we were doing wasn't working, but we didn't really know how to fix it. I mean, they'd spent millions and millions of dollars on 401 courses in coaching, and they weren't getting what they wanted out of it. And so what's the reason for this? Well, one issue is definition. And in the setup, in the title of the webinar, it kind of sets it up that this is a kind of a fluffy thing. Coaching feels very fluffy and nebulous.
It does, yeah.
And one of the issues is just definition. The sales managers say they're coaching. Sales reps, as you saw in the research, say they don't feel like it. But sales managers are adamant that they're coaching. And I think part of the issue here is, if a sales manager rides along with a salesperson one afternoon for 4 hours visiting customers, the sales manager will say they coached for 4 hours. The salesperson will say they got interrogated for 4 straight hours. It's not.
Right. Yeah. Hear this over and over again too.
Yeah. It's like, what is
Yeah.
coaching? It's not just when you're spending time. I mean, there has to be a definition around it. That's one of the problems. And one of the other issues that we think is probably even more foundational is that the coaching models that people are using, in fact, the client we were just talking about was using the GROW model, which is probably the most popular coaching model that we see. So you set a goal, what's the reality, what are the options to close the gaps, and what do you need to do? And you can pick any 3 to 5 letter word, and there's an acronym for it, right? Gains, pause, cigar. The problem is none of these letters stands for sales. These are very generic coaching models that could be used in finance for a manager.
Yeah, marketing.
Yeah, marketing for analysts. And so it's not surprising that coaches can't connect these coaching models to Monday to Friday behaviors.
Right.
Nothing in here says sales goal, sales reality, and that would even do it. So people are using very generic models, and that's just what they do. I mean, these models have been around for decades, so this is just what's done. And then the other final assumption that I think is bad is that there's this perception that coaching happens when you're in the field with your sales reps, and that's not really exclusively the case. I almost came to fisticuffs with someone in a training session one time because he was saying you can only coach in the field with the sales reps. And if that's the case, then you're kind of limiting the amount of coaching that's going to take place. Because if you ride along with your sales reps once a month for a few hours, you're basically saying that n minus a few hours every month you're not coaching that salesperson. And we think every interaction between a manager and a rep is an opportunity for coaching. If you ask sales managers, do you coach your reps? The response is often, well, I talk to my reps every day.
Yeah.
But that's not the question, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But those should be coaching conversations.
What's your take on the whole call recording thing, and managers and coaches sort of listening to the calls and giving them feedback on that? Would you categorize that as effective coaching, or maybe a method of it?
Oh, sure, it can be. There's several companies, or one or two that we like more than others, that kind of record calls or even let people rehearse sales calls, and then the sales manager can kind of asynchronously watch it, right? So it doesn't have to happen at the same time, and we think that's great. Anytime a sales manager is observing behavior and providing feedback, I think that's pretty effective. I mean, it'd obviously be better if I were in a room and everyone watching were in the room, it would be better. But this is the way we're doing this because it's efficient.
Right.
But yes, I think technology is a great enabler. It's just not really enabled to the level that we think it should, which is where I'm going with the CRM conversation, of course.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah. So let me, just to kind of wrap up coaching and then step into the CRM discussion. We need coaching that's clearly defined, and it's kind of obvious when you say it, but just pull someone aside in your sales force and say, hey, what's coaching in your mind, and see what they say. It could be comical and depressing at the same time. And the biggest thing we think is that coaching needs to be linked to seller activity. Right? It has to change, as I said, the manager's behavior has to change the salesperson's behavior to change the buyer's behavior. And so if the coaching is based on career progression or closing big developmental gaps, it's not as useful as coaching someone to sell better. And that's what we're really trying to get it focused on. And if you do that, it improves performance today. It's not about closing career gaps and capability. It's about next week we can win more deals. That's what we think needs to happen, and it needs to happen where and when it's needed. Right? It can't happen once every quarter when you're in the field. I mean, every time you have a conversation about a deal or an account or a territory, I mean, you should be coaching. And so that's this is the hope for coaching in our mind, is that we can find coaching that kind of plugs some of these holes that we see.
Yeah. Quick question on the career gap and career sort of path development conversations. I feel that a lot of reps do like those conversations, and there is a time and place for it, but it does kind of convolute and overlap sometimes into those discussions that should only be focused on selling better. So how do you kind of separate those?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that. And it's one of the big issues is, well, not that specifically, but the issue of coaching isn't coaching. There are different types of coaching, and there's surely you have to have career development conversations, and those happen logically in annual reviews or whenever that takes place. But then there's also deal coaching, right? Coaching people to win deals. There's call coaching, people to make better calls. And again, I'll talk more about this in the context of our research. But coaching isn't coaching, and that's part of the frustration is when someone says, "Oh, we have a coaching model." Like, okay, well, is one enough? What is grow? Is that the And so it gets back to the definition of what is coaching. And if it's only to help, if it's to identify competency gaps, that's useful occasionally. But Monday morning, they're not talking about competencies. Monday morning, they're looking at the pipeline.
Right. Exactly.
People rarely get fired for not having the right competencies. They get fired for not making their number.
Right.
And so that's what coaching should be doing in our process. But there's a range of this, right? There's all kinds of coaching. And
sure.
We have an opinion that some's more valuable than other, but the big insight is that it's not all the same.
Right. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. Let's talk about CRM. This is one that is unlike coaching, in that CRM hasn't been around forever. I mean, surely reporting has been around since John Henry Patterson, was managing his sales team in 1880. But CRM is the last couple decades. It's in its incarnation and in its current promise for it's almost like pitched as the solution to all problems. It's been around since the late 1900s. So this is Tom Siebel, who didn't invent CRM. You may have not even been around when Tom Siebel was doing this, but in the late 90s, he started Siebel Systems, which basically became the face of software before Oracle became the face and SAP became the face, and now Salesforce is the face. Right? So it was the first software that everyone had to have, and thought of it as a very strategic advantage to have CRM. It was something it should be, but now everyone has it, so it can't be an advantage. But if you're using it better, it can. So this has been around for 20 years in its incarnation, and what's happened is it's kind of ushered in this golden age of reporting.
Yeah.
So on the screen there are 28. Don't count them, but there are 28 reports because symbolically one of our clients was publishing 28 management reports to the field every month. And what do you do with that? Just because you can create reports doesn't mean you should create reports, and just because you can collect and report data doesn't mean you should report that data. And what we've seen is, just like in any golden age, there's excess, and it's created a couple of things that we like to rail against. And I think as I share this with you, you'll immediately understand what I'm talking about. CRM, and not necessarily CRM as much as prevalent reporting, has created this culture of inspection.
Yeah.
Sales managers have become expert inspectors. Right? So they're inspecting how many calls you made. They're inspecting the size of your pipeline. They're inspecting whether you updated the system with the data in time. It's almost like a natural response when the reports are sitting on your screen. You just start looking at them and you go, well, that's an interesting number. What does that mean? You start clicking around. It's like surfing the web. 30 minutes later, you don't remember where you started or why you ended up where you did, but it's there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then when you go back to the sales rep, that's the conversation you have. Hey, I was looking in the system, the data didn't look right. And
Yeah.
you're basically managing the data, not managing the people, or at least you're trying to manage the data.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say is that it's kind of created this anxiety in the sales force. It's if there's one thing that we see companies really trying to drive compliance to, I mean, with the exception of obviously HR and legal things, but driving compliance with the CRM tool is so prevalent. People track how often people are logging in. They track how many people are using it. They track adoption, user adoption, and it just creates so much anxiety and friction in the sales force um, because it's not valuable in the way that users need it to be. I mean, if it were
Yeah.
valuable, they'd use it every day. I mean, I always laugh because no one struggles with email adoption. I don't hear everyone talk about that. Email's
Yeah.
useful. What happens is people don't see CRM as useful, and that's why they don't use it.
Yeah.
But anyway, the ultimate question here is, so we've got this great tool, and I honestly believe that CRM is the greatest gift given to sales management in the past 100 years since John Henry Patterson. But we haven't really figured out exactly how to use it most productively. In our mind, using it most productively is to use it for coaching. And so that's kind of the thing we're trying to work with here is, how do we do what seems the impossible if you look at our track record here, which is really marry CRM and coaching so that coaching takes place and is defined and expected, and then CRM is the great enabler that it's meant to be. So, I'll give you a second to ask questions or comment before I kind of get into the wedding ceremony here.
Yeah, I mean, I just love the notion of taking away that culture of sales managers being the inspectors to
Mm.
figuring out what are those key insights that can be extracted from the CRM to enable the coaching process rather than just being inspectors. One thing I was going to ask you about was dashboards. How do you feel about those? A lot of companies are doing this now, especially in SaaS. They're having dashboards and they're leaving them up on screens in the office throughout the day. Do you feel that enables like a bit of a competitive spirit among the reps and kind of decreases that anxiety, or do you think it does the opposite?
Well, so let's start from the beginning. The sales forces, and I mean all of them, are operated with the assumption that salespeople aren't motivated enough. And it's
Yeah,
kind of comical how much attention is on motivating salespeople. Billions of dollars a year in incentives and rewards and reporting and the whole thing, weekly calls and monthly
yeah,
quotas. And so I don't know that many salespeople that aren't working hard. So to some extent, you know, I can't totally get behind it if the intent is to make people more urgent and work harder. I don't know if I can get behind that, but if they're the handful of important metrics that really determine success, then you have to report them. I mean, transparency into what drives success and whether people are doing the right things is critical. So I could argue both sides of that. If it depends
mm,
on what's on the board.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but I am a strong believer in reporting, and I do believe that there's too much of it. So I have kind of this conflicted thing, and I'll talk about this a little bit. But if we could have fewer dashboards but more important metrics on them, then I think
right,
people would run in the right direction rather than trying to just get people running harder, which I think is a
yeah,
lot of the point of some of that stuff.
yeah, agreed, agreed. That's awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about some of the research that we did. We kind of played this accidental role of matchmaker between these two things. So the book that I wrote with my one of my partners, Michelle Vazana, it's called Cracking the Sales Management Code, and it's been a really popular book. It's been very good for us. But what we did basically, the nature of the research was we gathered a bunch of sales management reports. So we were trying to answer the question in a roundabout way. How are people measuring good in their sales forces? So what are people looking at to see these are guideposts for success? And so we gathered a bunch of reports from dozens of pretty big companies, our clients, and we started looking at the metrics, and that led to some other things, which I'll share some of those insights. But at the same time, it kind of turned into this coaching conversation, in that we saw that the reporting should be used to do exactly that, which is coach the
Right.
sales rep to higher levels of performance. So if you're interested in what I share with you in the next few minutes, I'd encourage you to pick up the book. You can download a couple chapters from our website. Actually, maybe we'll even send it out to the registrants afterwards.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Hey, Jason, we
So
do have
we
a question before you move on. We do have a question from Pedro Santime. He said, what are the most relevant indicators to determine the need for motivation in the sales force, and who should use these indicators to perform the motivation?
Okay, so motivation is needed when people are unmotivated.
Right.
If you sense that your people aren't working with a sense of urgency, if you sense that they are, for whatever reason, demoralized or lazy, or however you want to characterize it, then obviously motivation is meant to get people to do the right things.
Mhm.
Um, but motivation doesn't always improve performance. And so there's kind of this thing that I like to talk about, which is you're trying to drive Salesforce productivity. And there are two parts to productivity. There's efficiency and there's effectiveness.
Mhm.
And the efficiency piece is getting them doing the right things in the right volume to succeed. So maybe making more calls, maybe working harder, maybe trying harder, maybe coaching more, maybe training more. That's that. But the effectiveness piece is really about, how well they're doing their tasks. And I think we tend to focus on getting people working harder and more efficient, and we neglect a little bit of the how do we make them more capable sellers. And
Right.
so, but the role of motivation clearly has to lie with the frontline sales managers. And we think frontline sales managers are everything.
Yeah.
And a lot of times organizations view sales manage. Well, I shouldn't say organizations. A lot of times sales managers view themselves as a filter from the rest of the organization. They say, I just protect my reps from all the noise, or I try to take all the arrows so that my sales team can do the thing.
Right.
Managers shouldn't be deflecting; they should be transforming and transmitting. And so it's a good question, But motivation is needed when people are unmotivated. And the frontline sales managers have to be the ones, because a compensation plan can motivate a little bit, but it's not what we find to be the most motivating thing. In fact, I'll talk about that in a second.
Sure. Awesome. Thanks, man.
Question. Yeah. Um, I don't have a watch in front of me, oddly, so keep me honest on the time here.
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
Okay, so the research we did again was gathering a bunch of reporting, and as you can imagine, I mean, you've probably been looking at the screen as I answered that question. Here's just a sampling of some of the metrics that we found. We in the end had 306 metrics. We collected all these things and pared it down, and everyone was comparing revenue, one, right, market share. So if you can imagine 306 versions of these things on here, and we really started trying to sort through, well, what does this data mean? Like, what can we do with this data? And so one of the key things that came out of this research is what I'm going to share with you next. And this will seem very simple, but I'd like for you to think about how powerful it is. So we basically went through each of those metrics and said, okay, if I'm a sales manager, can I manage this metric? Right? Can I change this metric? Can I direct my sales team to do something different? Can I do something different to actually directly change that metric? And so for some of them, we discovered, which intuitively, you can't manage a lot of these numbers. But revenue, you can't manage revenue. If
No.
you could manage revenue, everyone would make their quota,
Yeah, you
right?
can only manage your actions. Yeah.
Yeah. So we call these business results. And these are things like revenue and customer satisfaction, maybe profitability, depending on how it's measured at the company level. These are kind of the health of the organization. And so, these are things that can't be managed, and we call them business results. The second layer of the three, the more manageable but not completely manageable metrics, we called sales objectives. And these are things like acquiring new customers or selling a
Hmm.
certain type of product. That's new customer acquisition, account growth. These are things that you ask the sales team to do, but you can't make a customer be your customer. You can't make someone buy a product. So there are things that are kind of guideposts along the way to making your quota. So if you want to make your quota, you have choices. You can sell more products, you can get more customers, or you can get more customers or grow your existing customers. Right? So the sales objectives that you choose matter, but the third is really where the insight starts to come here. We discovered that people were measuring, not surprisingly, sales activities. And
Right.
these are things like making sales calls and planning for sales calls and doing your account plans and for manager coaching or training or enabling the sales team with tools. So these are things that are actions that people do. And the insight here, so results, objectives, activities, the insight here is that we can only manage activities. And it sounds so simple, but it's not. Let me just give you a story to kind of punctuate this point.
Hmm.
Um, so one of the earliest training sessions we were doing. I don't do a lot of the training anymore, but at the beginning, as we were developing this intellectual property, we were the people, and so we're in this session with these sales managers, and there's this rock star sales manager, and we'll call him Glenn because his name is actually Glenn. It makes it easier for me. Can't keep it straight. So Glenn's this rock star sales manager, and he raises his hand, and we get to this point about you can only manage activities, and he said, I have to admit that I'm a little embarrassed by what you just said. You can only
Hmm.
manage activities. And he said, I've been a manager for about 10 years, and I've probably hired 30 sales reps during that time. And he said, on the first day of their employment, each of those people sat across from my desk and said some form of this question: Glenn, what do you want me to do? And I looked back across the desk, and in every case, I said, I want you to make your quota. And he said, I now realize that was the stupidest, least useful thing I could have told someone that just got hired in a sales role, given a quota and an incentive compensation plan that made it pretty clear that was my expectation. He said, what they were really saying is, Glenn, what do I do?
Yeah.
And he said, if I had been able to answer that question, some of those reps might still be here. They might not have, I might be reporting to some of those reps because they were smart and motivated people. They just wanted some guidance as to what to do. And so
Yeah.
I think as leaders, we talk a lot about making quota. We tell people to run toward quota. It's like if you have kids, like I do, you tell them you want them to make good grades. Well, they know that they want to
Yeah.
make good grades. They need to change their habits. They need to change their behaviors. And so this idea that you can only manage activities is simple but powerful.
It
And when
is.
people really get their head around this, you'll see management changing their behaviors quite a bit, and the results will immediately come when you
Oh
start
yeah.
focusing.
Yeah, when I was at Pipedrive, one of the big, big drivers of sales success was this notion of focusing on activity-based sales, this
Mhm.
activity-based sales framework. And the co-founders of Pipedrive were pushing your book on us as required reading. And as
Oh,
somebody as a content marketer, who sat in the SDR island, as I absorbed all the knowledge from reading your book, it really started to click the more and more that I sat and listened to all the things that the sales process really turned into from this sort of push forward movement of the activity-based sales.
no, good. Well, thank you for saying that.
Yeah, man.
The So just let me actually say something about the motivation thing here as well. There's a piece of research that was published in Harvard Business Review. It's been a while ago, but it's timeless in my mind. And it was done by some university researchers. They may be a little naive, I don't know, they basically tried to understand what motivated salespeople. And so they asked obviously rewards, recognition, compensation, a bunch of other stuff. And the thing that they found that was most motivating to salespeople in the study was clarity of task. So if I'm a
Mm,
salesperson, I know what to do to succeed. I'm extremely motivated to do it. But if I think I know what to do, or you tell me what to do, and I don't succeed, it's a bummer and pretty
yeah.
unmotivating. And so this idea of getting clarity of what are the activities that'll drive success it's foundational to coaching. Because if you and your salespeople agree what they need to do to succeed, they're very motivated to do it. But there's a little bit of a challenge in that. You have to actually identify what it how,
Exactly.
how, how it
And
goes.
Jason, we have tons of questions coming in right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Many of them are along the lines of key sales activities. So I think I'll summarize about three questions here in one. I
Sure.
think what the audience wants to know is if you can maybe outline a couple of examples of the most important activities to manage from a sales perspective.
Okay. Well, this perfect setup. Let me talk about. Let me just get into the next section because I'm gonna basically provide you with categories of sales activities, which I
Oh,
think may be
perfect.
a little more useful. So let me tell you something we learned about sales activities as we studied this, and this is directly answering the question. I'm not trying to dodge. When we looked at these activities, and incidentally, only 17% of the metrics that we found in our study were actual activities. 83% were stuff that can't be managed. But when we looked at the stuff that could be managed, we found that all of the salesperson activities, there's enablement stuff and coaching and other things, but all the salesperson stuff fell into three buckets, and we call them sales processes. Salespeople are basically making calls, they're pursuing opportunities, they're acquiring and growing key accounts, key or some type of important account, and they're mining their territories for opportunity. And so when we looked at this, we said, look, all of the metrics, all the metrics of all the activities were focused on sales reps accomplishing one of these four things: making better sales calls, pursuing opportunities more strategically, acquiring and growing key accounts, or being more thoughtful about how they were approaching their territory. And so we
Mm-hmm.
basically in the book, which you read, kind of categorize these in four processes. And so let me talk about this. These are the processes that you should be, and these are sets of activities that you should be paying attention to. The process, as we define it, is just a collection of activities that are pointed at a single outcome. So the first process, call management. And all of these activities are about improving individual customer interactions. So this is a very classic kind of call planning, um,
Sure.
coaching. around sales calls, right? Being in the field, debriefing and documenting sales calls. So there are all these activities that kind of point toward making better sales calls. And then there's another set of sales activities that point toward, and coaching and enablement activities that point toward managing opportunities better. And we've all probably seen an opportunity plan, right? Who are the buyers? What are their agendas? Who do we need to engage in the process, right? So there's like this process that's all around how do we pursue opportunities, and pipeline management would actually fall into that bucket as well. And then the third is account management, right? So we have some accounts that are particularly important for whatever reason, and there are all these activities, right? So it's literally account planning, right? And then the third is territory management. Territory management most often manifests itself when you have ABC accounts, or tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And this is about segmenting your customers so that you can allocate your effort most efficiently among them. And so, the question was, what are some of the important sales activities? Well, these are the most important collections of activities. So you can leave out reporting, you can leave out a lot of the other stuff, but as salespeople go, depending on what their role is, some of this is more important than other stuff. And so these are the activities that we saw as being critically important. They have to make better calls and pursue opportunities and acquire accounts and territories, right? And none of this says make your quota. None of this says grow your accounts necessarily. These are the activities, these are the actual things your team would do to accomplish objectives of better calls, more won opportunities, right? Better accounts, and more productive territories.
Awesome.
So the punchline is these are the things you should be measuring in coaching. And CRM can be incredibly powerful in doing that. Right? So, CRM can, well, at least 17% of the metrics in our study, we're focused on measuring things about calls, measuring things about opportunities. And when the technology enables that, then you get amazingly productive salespeople, much more productive than you do by just telling them, hey, make your quota.
Right. It's no different than like in marketing, like, hey, go viral on a post, it's like, well, it's kind of hard to do.
Yeah, you can't manage market share. Right, you can't manage brand awareness. You have to manage the things that build that, and that's the reality. And we know it's always like, I want to be healthier. Okay, fine. So what does that mean? Does that mean I want to, lose weight? Does it mean I want to build muscle mass? Does it mean I want to lower my cholesterol? Well, if those are the objectives, which one of those you choose informs the activities, right? Because you're not going to do any of that until you eat different or exercise different or, whatever it is. And so this idea of reverse engineering stuff to the activity level is not revolutionary in the world. It's just revolutionary in sales.
Yeah, and it ties back into what you said at the beginning about getting back to basics and blocking and tackling. It makes perfect sense. Jason, we do have another question from VJ, and he wants to know this. Is trust within the sales team and with the leader a bigger challenge while coaching and using CRM as a tool?
Is trust a bigger challenge in the sales team and using CRM?
Yeah.
Well, trust is a huge issue in the sales force all around. There's no part of the organization that's more geographically dispersed. A lot of salespeople don't come to the office even, and so trust is important all around. CRM is something that's kind of an interesting thing because CRM is used more as a weapon in some ways than a tool, right? Because it's used to beat salespeople over the head. Right? You're not putting the data in, or if you are, the data doesn't look right. And then that immediately puts you in some contentious thing with your sales manager, like, oh, I didn't put the deal in. That's why these numbers don't look right. Well, why didn't you put the deal in? Well, I didn't have the thing and didn't have the thing. And so we see so much argument over data in CRM. So, I think it should be foundational. If you trust that the data is being put in and you trust people putting in the right data, then it can be really useful for you to reflect back in a productive way to the sales team. But trust is, if you can't trust your salespeople, it's time to let them go. My thinking.
Exactly. We do have one more question too from Frank regarding the 4 sales processes that you have mentioned here. So the question is, where do you see the most wasteful practices within the 4 sales processes that you highlighted, and what could be done to reduce or eliminate the waste?
Most waste. Okay, so there's waste in all of these. One of the biggest things that we see is with call management. I think anyone who's been around sales for a while has been given a call plan. And a lot of times when call plans get deployed, the missive to the organization is you have to plan every call. You don't have to plan every call. You only have to plan the hard calls or the really important calls. What happens is, and I think this is the same way with every sales process, and maybe even every sales tool, it's deployed and people are expecting strict adherence and universal adherence to it, but it really only needs to be used when it needs to be used. So I do think that call plans are a place that we see a lot of wasted energy that ends up in abandoned call plans. But if you tell the team, look, when it's an important sales call, I expect you to plan this and let's sit down and have a conversation about it. That's different than saying you have to plan 15 sales calls in the next 3 days.
Right.
The other big waste is probably just our biggest opportunity is in territory management. So territory management is all about making sure your salespeople are pointed at the best opportunities. And in a lot of organizations, and take a salesperson that may have, I don't know, 100 prospects or 200 prospects, and they have to allocate their time among those. Often they don't even know who are the best prospects.
Yeah.
If they don't have enough time to pursue all the opportunities, they don't know where are the best opportunities. And so, we've seen companies struggle, but then really make big headway when they start trying to quantify where the salespeople should be taking their time, spending their time. So I don't know if there's as much wasted energy in the process, but I think it's an ignored process that leads to a bunch of inefficiency because no one's getting any more time in the day. You got to use it the best you can.
Yeah, exactly. I've heard so many horror stories of like reps getting these massive lists of territories and accounts and just, hey, go to town and have fun with those. And it's like, oh, all right, well, I guess you're gonna set them up to fail then.
Well, in the worst case scenario, they start at the top left and go down to the bottom right in direct order, with no prioritization. And the next worst is if they take some bad. I mean, how do you even prioritize them? That's a place that CRM and technology can really be very valuable in trying to quantify the size of the customer, the size of the opportunity, how fertile they are for your products, your competition. There's a lot of ingenious technology to help people prioritize their time, but it's just not used. We just send people out into the world with a rich commission plan and let them, sink or swim.
Right. Yeah, agreed. We do have another question from Charlie Blake before we continue into the presentation. Charlie wants to know, do you measure the coaching activity? Meaning, do you have the managers log their coaching activity? So I guess the heart of that question is, who's coaching the coachers?
Yeah, well, two questions, two equally important questions. I wrote a blog post one time, and I can't remember exactly the title of it, but it basically said, here's one metric you should be tracking in your sales force, the most important metric, and it is coaching. And so one way that you can do it is, as you said, to kind of have sales managers log how much time they're coaching. Or another way I've seen it done is in the CRM tool, they'll literally have a little tick box that said, the salesperson received coaching on this opportunity, because then they're trying to correlate whether coaching, with the opportunities correlates to higher success rate, higher win rates. Nice. But the way that I like to think about it is this, back to my point earlier that the salespeople are the consumers of coaching. And so I think if you just had one metric, if you just deployed a survey to all of your sales people and said, do you think you're receiving enough good coaching from your manager? Right, and just leave it to them to decide, is it enough and is it good enough? And I think that would be kind of interesting if it were done, anonymously, to see how many salespeople really think they're receiving sufficient and good sales coaching. But there are lots of ways. But the answer is yes, you should be measuring it. Absolutely, I think it's probably the most important thing you can measure. I think that, but obviously we have a perspective on it. But how you measure it can be done a number of ways, whether it's opportunities or calls or time spent coaching, et cetera. The only thing I'll say about, I'm rambling a little bit, but the problem is asking sales managers how much time they're spending was revealed in the survey I shared earlier. If they're spending time with the sales rep, they think they're coaching. So, the definition of coaching has to be laid out before you can really get, any idea whether or not this is actually you're talking about the same thing.
Right. Agreed. Awesome. Well, thank you, Jason.
Okay. Well, I'm sure that we're running out of time, even though I'm not being told that. Let me just kind of skip forward here and talk. So I make the point here that there are different types of coaching. Let me talk about what we did with this one client, and then kind of open up to even more questions, because it sounds like a pretty active funnel of questions, which is great. It's all good questions. So the idea here again is that if you want coaching to take place, you have to define it. You have to put it in a place on the calendar, which we really talk about, but you have to define when and where it's going to happen. And then you need to set expectations and measure and enable it with technology. And so if you recall, the case study I talked about before, there was 56% of the sales reps said they were basically receiving no coaching, and they had a 25% win rate, which was in their minds unacceptable.
Yeah.
Because again, they were dominant in the marketplace. So the step one here was to just establish the goal. What's the goal of coaching? And the goal of coaching, we don't think should just be to improve revenue. The goal of coaching should be to improve specific. I mean, we like to point it at sales objectives, right? To acquire new customers or to grow existing accounts. Things that there's a little closer link between the activity and the outcome. And so in this case, they wanted to improve win rates, which we consider a sales objective, right? So they weren't saying we need to get more revenue. They said we have to focus on winning more deals. And when you approach enablement and coaching in that way, it provides a little more insight into what exactly you should be doing. So what we chose to focus on with them, I should say they chose to focus on and we helped them, is helping the sales reps be better at managing opportunities, so qualifying and disqualifying opportunities early, pursuing them more strategically, and then also coaching them to make better sales calls. So in these high profile kind of high risk opportunities, the next sales call is going to make or break it. And so they really made the choice that here are the activities that are important in this case. But again, if they had key account managers that had these big accounts, account management might have been the place that we focused. But anyway, they really were trying to drive close rates, and managing the opportunities and making better sales calls was the path that they chose to go. And so here we get to defining the coaching conversation. So this is an example of it's almost a pretty direct lift actually from a coaching guide that we helped them develop. And so again, they were going to focus on managing the opportunities better. Qualifying and disqualifying was a very important activity. And so they had a lot of focus on the early stage conversation between the manager and rep. So the new opportunity is uncovered. Here's where we want the coaching to be inserted. And so they said literally, these are the questions we want answered in these coaching conversations. The salesperson has to come prepared to have the conversation. Sales manager has to come prepared to have the conversation. It was really excruciatingly well defined. And then the final step was to support it with data. So this is a screenshot from a reporting tool that they had developed internally. And this was the data that they determined was necessary to identify, is there enough stuff in the pipeline? Is it healthy? Where do we need coaching? What are the priorities for where the sales manager should be putting his coaching in the context of, which sales calls and which opportunities. And CRM in this case was very powerful and very useful to enable coaching because it pointed the sales manager and the salespeople in the right directions. Here's the coaching you should be doing based on the data that we have. And so, one of the biggest issues sales managers have is where do I spend my time coaching? If I had an extra hour, but I have 15 sales reps, where do I go? And that's the perfect use of CRM and data. And so the impact of this, the outcome of this was, from zero coaching to 91% of the salespeople. And this is 18 months after the fact, and this was a process. But eventually, 91% of the sales reps said, "Yeah, I'm getting coached," because it was defined. Right, the salespeople knew this is what coaching was, and sales managers knew that that's what coaching was. So it was easier to identify to the question of how do you measure it. And then here's the end game here. They were going after win rates. So 25%. 6 months prior to our engagement, they were winning 25% of their deals. 6 months post, they were at 37%, and then 18 months post, they were winning a little more than half of their forecasted deals. And so, for them, this was a success. And it really was all about, carefully defining coaching, pointing it at activities, all the stuff we talked about, and then building CRM, the capability in CRM to enable that coaching, and not just to kind of observe compliance with expectations, but to really kind of carefully guide the team to where they should be spending their time. What are the opportunities to coach? What are the calls to coach? And it obviously became a very powerful thing over time. Change takes time. So let me pause with that. And let's just do some questions. I hate to stop on this screen because you look so much cooler than I do in it. This is what we got. So here we go.
Yeah, that's my glamour shot. We are.
Not mine.
Yeah, we are just about out of time. I think we got through all the questions. I think there was one or two left that we didn't get to that we can probably talk about right now. The one in here that I think we may have missed was, okay, so this is from Carlos. If you had to close this presentation off by putting a final stamp of authority on a standardized definition, reliable definition of coaching, what would that be?
Sure. Well, as I opened by saying coaching isn't coaching, but the most fundamental thing is that coaching is when a sales manager and a sales rep have a value-added interaction. Yeah. And there's so you may know Neil Rackham. He wrote Spin Selling and some other things. great kind of an inspirational researcher and writer, and for me anyway. And so he used to always say that the true measure of a good consultative sales call is if the customer would have pulled out their checkbook and written the salesperson a check. They were so grateful that the salesperson made that call. There was so much value. Either the sales rep, the sales rep either convinced the buyer that they were going down the wrong path, or they made some bad assumptions. And we've all had, as a buyer, we've all had these conversations, right? Like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy I talked to that salesperson. And I think that we should apply that same filter to coaching. I think a good coaching interaction should be so valuable that a salesperson would literally pay the sales manager for the privilege of that interaction. And I think that more often than not, salespeople probably pay to avoid interactions with their sales manager.
Yeah.
So I mean, it comes down to having really value-added conversations between a manager and a rep, and valuable to the point that the sales rep leaves the conversation thinking, "Oh my gosh, that was so valuable. I'm so happy I had the conversation, because now I'm going to do something differently, and I'm going to think differently about it. I'm going to behave differently, and obviously they'll be more successful."
Exactly. We do have another question coming in from Doug. Doug, thanks for the question, man. So a lot of this presentation did feel to me too like there needs to be some organizational culture shift from that zero coaching to how you had that bar chart that showed 18 months after win rates up almost 50% and above. So the question from Doug is, how do you overcome these massive challenges from moving to a no coaching environment to a real coaching cadence for sales managers and as well as reps? How do you kind of ignite that transformation that has to happen in an organization that's really falling behind?
Yeah, so we get a lot of questions about how do you create a sales coaching culture. Right? Yeah. Coaching culture is something that we get, or we get engaged when people say we're committed to creating a culture of coaching. Now can you help us do this? And I think the challenge is that culture, kind of like coaching, has this nebulous, ethereal feel to it. And the way that you create a coaching culture is to do exactly what we just talked about. You clearly define expectations. Mm-hmm. Right? This is what coaching is. This is the conversations you're going to have. Here's when you're going to have the conversation. And so if you decide you're going to have coaching conversations around new opportunities that have been uncovered every 2 weeks, and sales manager, sales rep are going to meet every Friday, every other week, and talk about the top 2 opportunities they've uncovered in that time period, then you can also, the expectation set, you can also hold people accountable to that. You say, okay, are you having these conversations, whether you survey people or whether you just intermittently just pull some salespeople and go, hey, are you guys having these conversations every 2 weeks? And so it's all about setting the expectation, which means you have to clearly define it, and then building accountability. That's the ultimate driver of culture, is how accountable are people for the behavior that you want. And so it always falls down to blocking and tackling in my mind. You have to set the expectation and then monitor it. But the burden's on leadership there to really clearly define what it is you want to happen. You can't just say we want more coaching and expect it to happen, because what does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. That's too true. We have even more questions coming right now. We got about 5 minutes, so we'll get into these. All right, so here's one from Ken Goldenberg. That bar chart that you showed ignited quite a spark with the audience. So the question, there's a couple of questions on this. So from Ken, what was the most important change that took place in the manager behavior to achieve that spike over the 18-month period of growth?
Yep. So the most important, obviously it was a change effort, right? There's a lot of stuff going on, but the biggest change was, so remember, they were trying to improve their win rates with their deals. And so what they discovered, which I think you might discover in your organization too, whoever is watching at this point, is that the pipeline is big and unhealthy. And so their big observation was they had a lot of unhealthy stuff in the sales pipeline. And that's why, one of the key coaching activities was to engage salespeople early in the sales process to help them disqualify bad deals. And it was, talk about a cultural shift, right? Most sales managers are trying to grow the sales pipeline and get salespeople to put more stuff in it, and they were actually having meetings trying to disqualify deals from the sales pipeline. So the pipelines didn't grow at all. In fact, in some cases, they went down slightly, which you talk about suspension of disbelief when you tell your salespeople to have smaller sales pipelines. But that activity was probably the number one thing that drove the improved close rates, because they were, they were basically taking out all the losers before they lost them, and they were spending more time on the winners. In fact, by the end they were doing more prospecting because they had more time, because they weren't pursuing these bad deals. But hard to take a deal out of the pipeline until it's just dead,
Mm,
right?
mm.
That big activity was just making sure the pipeline was healthier.
Man, so much of this stuff too. It goes back to the blocking and tackling, and it's so simple, but it's so effective and powerful.
Yeah.
All right, so here's one from Jessica. This is a really good one. How do you coach people who think they don't need to be coached?
Well, that is a question. My wife might ask the same thing about me. I'm not exactly. Um, well, I was thinking about this just this week. Believe it or not necessarily in this context, but the thing is, a lot of times it's like, who do you coach? Do you coach the stars or do you coach the bottom performers? Right. This is kind of the same thing. Is if you want to coach someone and they're not a willing recipient of that coaching, what can you do? I mean, that's a hard one. Personally, if the salesperson is performing well, but they're not taking coaching, that's one thing. If the salesperson's failing and they're not willing to take coaching, then you have to ask some very fundamental questions about this person's motivation and their willingness to be in the organization and succeed. So I think the one thing, and I sound like a broken record, but it's honestly what I believe. I think you just really have to take it down to very tactical things. You have to say, whether or not you call it coaching, you don't have to call it coaching. You can call it anything you want to. You say, Jason, look, I'd like to start meeting every other week for about a half an hour, and let's just talk about some of your opportunities and see if there's anything we can do as an organization to help. And if you start putting very tactical steps in place, it's almost impossible for them to say no. If they're to the point of being disobedient about requests, then I think what you have to do is pretty obvious.
Right.
But the thing is, maybe not call it code. In fact, interestingly, when we did this training this client I mentioned, they'd taken 401 courses in coaching, and the training leader said, no matter what we do, we cannot name this course coaching. You can't have coaching anywhere in the title because no one will come because they think they know how to coach. And so we called it pipeline management or something. And so the answer is you have to set those tactical expectations. And if they're unwilling to do what you ask them to do, then that's a separate question. But I appreciate the fact that people don't want input. If they're successful, that's one thing. If they're failing, that's another.
Awesome. We're about 3 minutes left. This will be the final two of the day. This is from Blake. Blake wants to know, how do you create a culture where sales reps use their CRM effectively, but at the same time you avoid that inspection culture that you mentioned earlier in the presentation that raised a lot of eyebrows?
Yeah. So there's the CRM adoption question is prevalent everywhere.
Yeah.
And there are a couple ways you can do it. We worked with one client, and the head of sales operations said to me one day, he goes, I don't know why everyone struggles with this. There's 100% adoption in our sales force of CRM. I said, John, that's amazing. How'd you do that? He said, it's a condition of employment. That no matter who you are, if you don't use CRM, I even know one organization that paid their salespeople to put data in CRM because they thought they needed it to manage. But so one is just the carrot or stick, however you want to choose it, pay them or punish them.
Mm.
But the real challenge with CRM, which I mentioned before, is they don't perceive value in it. And the reality is, salespeople can do their jobs in most instances without CRM. Like they literally can. They can do their jobs, and not much worse even. So what you need to do is make sure that the sales activities that they're engaged in, basically CRM's integrated into their workflow. As I said, you can't not use email, right? You use everything. What you do as a salesperson involves email. And so you have to find ways to take those activities that they're actually doing, right? Making sales calls or doing, finding opportunity, whatever it is. And that has to be input into the CRM tool so that CRM does become valuable. I mean, if your salespeople can get away, if they can do their job without CRM, they're going to. I mean, it's just the reality of the situation. So it has to be indispensable.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Jason. We're just about out of time. We had some more questions come in, but if you guys want to follow up with Jason, Jason, why don't you tell the audience where they can find you, how they can connect with you, and how they can learn more about Vantage Point?
Great. So you can see my email address and my Twitter handle there. Also on LinkedIn, please seek me out. I'm not that hard to find. And but I would more importantly even encourage you to go to our website, which is the end of my email address, right? VantagePointPerformance.com. We've invested a lot of time and money in building what we think is a valuable resource. So we have a resource center on the website, and there's tons of research on pipeline management and forecasting and coaching and training sales managers and to some extent salespeople. But please do visit the website and beat around. There's so much stuff there.
Awesome. And yeah, to the audience, make sure you subscribe to Sales Hackers YouTube channel where you can get the replay of today's webinar. Also, definitely follow us on SlideShare. We're going to upload Jason's deck to our SlideShare account. Make sure you follow us and connect with us there. And finally, we also have some blog content coming out from Jason in the future. We already had something come out in the past, so make sure you check out our blog. We have a few more articles coming out from Jason next week. And yeah, you can connect with us also on Twitter at Sales Hacker. You can connect with me, Gaetano NYC. Hit me up on LinkedIn, and you know where else to find us. So thanks, Jason. This is an awesome presentation. We got tons of positive feedback and engagement from the audience, which is a great sign. And it's always a pleasure to have you and learn from you and speak with you, man. So thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Let's do it again.
All right, awesome. Yeah, thanks, Niels. Appreciate it, man. A couple of people were saying this was so awesome in the comments. So, all right, man. Well, thanks again, Jason. We'll talk to you next time. Everyone, we're signing out. Peace.